All right, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. And I would like to welcome Teri Yates. Teri, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And so, guys, as we were talking about, what we're here to talk about today is the differentiation of ambulatory surgery centers and how that can kind of help or maybe not help your practice. And so we wanted to bring Teri on to be able to just talk a little bit more about it, because I think this is something that in our field, a lot of people talk about. I know a lot of different practices and even solo providers ask about this idea of ambulatory surgery centers and how they can really help them to optimize their practice and optimize their reimbursement for the things that we're doing. So, Teri, why are we here with you today and talking about all this?
Well, great question. My career has been in healthcare. That's all I've ever done. And I'm 54 years old. But for the last 11 years, I've been concentrating specifically on helping physicians be successful in private practice. So I started a company called Accountable Physician Advisors, as I said, 11 years ago. And through that company, started my journey with helping physicians develop office-based cath labs, office-based procedural suites. We enhanced our service offerings along the way to provide revenue cycle management services for these physicians. And in 2020, during the pandemic, it was a good time for us to look at what was happening in our business and where do we think things were going? Because, everybody was slowed down a little bit and we had time to think and strategize. And so we knew, especially because we do a lot of work with cardiologists, that ambulatory surgery center development was important to their future, which made it important to our future. And so also launched a company called Doc-Centric Surgery Centers in 2020 to help with that. So for a long time now, we've been spending certainly more than half of our time working on these kinds of projects, and during that time have been involved with dozens of projects, either from the feasibility study analysis or the full development that were either an office-based procedural suite or an ambulatory surgery center.
Very cool. Well, I think, within our field, within pain medicine, there's obviously everybody understands that we have to have a place to be able to do our procedures. So there's a place that the patient comes to be able to lie on a table and have a CRM placed over their back to be able to get these procedures done. And I think a lot of it kind of depends on, for where people were trained, maybe the communities that they're currently working in terms of whether there are office-based procedure rooms or whether people do most of their work at the ambulatory surgery centers. I think it's pretty rare in this day and age for people to be hospital-based, but I know that there are still the occasional setups, particularly if you're a hospital employee where you are doing hospital-based procedures. But maybe a good place to start is just, what's the major difference between an office-based procedure suite and an ambulatory surgery center?
Well, foundationally, an office-based procedure suite is just a part of your medical practice. So it's usually in the same location where you have a clinic, where you see patients. And sometimes people structure an office-based suite as a standalone location with other physicians, but the majority of time, it's just an extension of your medical practice. And Medicare doesn't have any special rules when it comes to billing office-based procedural services that are different. So it's the same place of service when you submit a claim. Versus an ASC, it's a distinct facility. It has a different place of service code, and it's legally and physically separated from your medical practice, and you're only billing the facility fees. So in the office-based procedural suite, you're billing the global fee that covers both your professional services and the facility expenses like nursing or supplies. When you have an ASC, it's facility fee only, and your professional service component is billed through your practice. There are no special Medicare regulations that govern an office-based procedural suite. Now, there are some other regulatory concerns to be aware of, but from Medicare's point of view, there's nothing special. Versus for an ASC, there are conditions of coverage that are highly structured that mandate everything from how you handle governance with physicians who do cases there, to what the facility construction looks like, to infection control procedures. Across the board, they have regulations governing all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's generally what I've seen from different physicians as they're starting to look into the ambulatory surgery center route. Once you start looking at all of those regulatory concerns, I think that's where people start getting a little scared, right? And start thinking, okay, well, maybe this office-based life is really the life for me, and it just makes it a little bit less to deal with on the regulatory side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. It's simpler in most cases. To be office based, we tell people you kind of really have to think about your ASC in some respects as being held to the same kind of standards hospitals are held to in certain instances. So it is very different in that respect.
So I think you kind of started touching on it a little bit, but what are the major reimbursement differences for the settings? I mean, obviously there's a lot more regulation in the ASC. And so obviously there's a lot more that goes into running an ASC. So how does the reimbursement change per setting?
Well, as I mentioned, first and foremost, the ASC, you're billing the facility fee separately, and any compensation for your professional services gets billed out of your medical practice entity. But the other thing that's very different is you can't bill diagnostic imaging out of an ASC unless it's integral to the procedure, and then it's basically bundled into the procedure. So you're not billing, if you have your office, you have multiple different things that you might be billing for, but it's very focused in the ASC. And then the other thing that's very different is in an ASC, there's a primary procedure code, and almost all reimbursement is bundled into that code. So if you're doing something like an ablation in your office, and you're, treating multiple, nerves, for example, there are add-on codes. And so you have your primary procedure code, and then you're getting paid for this additional work that you're doing. In the ASC, it's one and done, unless there are, just a very narrow set of circumstances where there might be two codes that are paired together. But for the most part, you've got one primary procedure code. And that's a big difference in terms of how we come up with the total reimbursement on a case.
And just for confirmation's sake, that's for the facility fee, correct? From the professional
Correct.
fee.
Correct. On the professional fee side that you're billing through your practice, you're billing now, add-on codes, there's no discount. If you're billing multiple primary procedure codes that aren't, quote, an add-on code, you may be subject in your office to multiple procedure discounts. But back to the point with the ASC, it's one code.
Got it. Now, is there a setting where you can have an ASC or an office-based procedure that are kind of interchangeable? Like how does that work from a facility standpoint?
So lots of people do what's called a hybrid. And what that means in very plain terms is I have the same facility, and certain days of the week I operate it as an office-based procedural suite, and other days of the week I operate it as an ASC. Now, the details when you do something like that matter. So they're two separate legal entities. In essence, one of them is the person who owns that facility. And then that legal entity would, for example, lease the space to the other legal entity to use on the days that it's being used. Now, this is permissible in a lot of places. Some states don't allow it. So when you're contemplating that kind of arrangement, you have to look at, locally, is that permissible? Medicare allows it, but they have some specific rules, and they're mostly around making sure that Medicare beneficiaries understand when they walk up to the door for their procedure, what kind of place is this? Because the copays are different in an office than they are in an ASC. And so you have to have a completely distinct entrance on the day of procedures. So let's say you're operating your suite as an ASC on Monday. Patients can't come and walk into the same door that they would walk into to see you in clinic Monday, that they would walk into if they're seeing your partner for a procedure in the ASC. So there has to be a distinct entrance, there has to be a distinct waiting area, and there needs to be signage, placed there that day that makes it clear this is what this place is operating as today. So that's really important. And you have to keep your medical records separate because these are two separate legal entities. You're going to have, an instance of your EHR that covers your ASC if you have an EHR in your ASC, and that's not required, but at a minimum, you have to have billing software in your ASC, and that's got to be separate. And you have to store medications separately. So, there are some rules, but that's what people do how they operate when they refer to it as a hybrid with ASC.
Got it. And just for kind of thoroughness sake, that would mean that that space has to meet all of the Medicare requirements to be an ASC. And then some days, essentially you're building an ASC, but then some days operating it as an office-based procedure suite.
That's exactly right.
And so let's presume that setting, right, where, you've kind of have this place that has now, dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's to be, good enough for a Medicare ambulatory surgery center. What would be a setting that it would make sense to be able to do all of the, the logistics to be able to operate as a hybrid, to have some occasionally be able to use as a office-based procedure suite?
I mean, that's a great question. And typically doctors say they're interested in doing that so that they can optimize reimbursement. I want to put the cases that pay better in the ASC on my ASC days, and I want to put the cases that pay better in the office on my office days. We actually say that's not usually the ideal reason to do it. It can be difficult sometimes, especially with certain specialties, to know exactly whether there's going to be more complexity in a case in advance. That may not be true, in your world, but for some physicians it is. So having that can be a little challenging to know in advance. And attorneys that I work with are a little nervous about Medicare perceiving physicians as cherry picking on that basis. But there are two really good reasons to do a hybrid. And the first one is, I really think that for my patients, office-based services make all the sense in the world, but I also want to do services that are not permissible in the office. And so you can't put a spinal cord stimulator in the office. Medicare doesn't pay for that. So one rationale for doing a hybrid is, well, I want to have the ability certain days of the week to offer a higher level of services. Another reason that people do it is it's a transitional step, because another major difference with an ambulatory surgery center is that the credentialing process is prolonged compared to your office. So if you have an existing medical practice and you have, you construct the suite, the day that you're operating it as part of your medical practice, there's nothing special new you have to do with credentialing. You already have payer contracts and you can start billing and getting payments right away. An ambulatory surgery center, once it's constructed, you have to get through an accreditation survey, pass that accreditation survey, then get approval by Medicare once they see that you've passed, which takes a couple of months after you open. And then after you have a Medicare number, you can start to ask commercial payers if they'll contract with you. And so that process can be very long, and physicians often it may be a year and a half until their ASC is fully credentialed. So what we tell our clients is, why don't you operate it as an ASC, one day a week when you have very limited, payer contracts in place, do an office-based procedure suite the other days. And so that way you're making money that helps support the overhead in this facility while you're waiting for all those ASC payer contracts to come through.
Got it. Well, so outside of that situation, which, I mean, obviously that makes a ton of sense why in that situation you would want it to be both. How would you generally go about determining, whether an ASC or an office-based suite is the right thing for you? I mean, I'm sure, there's a lot of different things, and probably the size of, the practice, right? Whether it's a solo practitioner versus a group practice, I'm sure make a difference. But like, what's the process of trying to figure that out?
Sure. Well, there are a lot of different factors that come into play when you're trying to determine which direction to go on that. And one is your case mix. As I said, if you have a high percentage of cases that you're doing that are not payable in the office setting, well, you know that you need an ASC. If you don't have that as a determining factor, then you start to look at things like, well, what is my total volume? Because the cost of an ASC is higher. Do I have enough volume to be profitable with that level of investment? Or do I want the flexibility to have a multi-specialty facility, which is amenable in an ASC situation? You could have a great partnership with an orthopedic group that is also an owner in that ASC and be in that investment together, versus that's not the case for your office-based suite. And I think the advice that we would give is there's a lot that goes into it, including, is a CON required in your state? So the best way to answer that question is to do a feasibility study. And we would say hire someone that's what they do, their expertise, because there are a lot of different questions that you as a physician might not know how to research or be thinking through as you're making that analysis.
Just for our listeners, can you define CON?
Sure. So in many states of the country, states restrict your ability to do large, expensive healthcare projects by requiring you to get what's called a certificate of need, or in, some places they call it a determination of need. Everybody has their own language. But in short, it's a regulatory review to say, is the proposed expenditure for this new healthcare facility necessary for our community? And it's a way of restricting who can enter the market. And there are some states, many states, that don't have any certificate of need requirement at all. There are some that have them, but with a lot of potential exceptions. So, there are states like Georgia where if you're building an ASC and it will only be for a single specialty that's associated with one medical practice, then you can get a waiver of the requirement. But if you want to do a multi-specialty facility, you have to go through the full CON approval process. I'm, looking at some states like Massachusetts that are highly restrictive, and in practical terms, unless you have a health system partnered with you on the project and endorsing it, you're not going to get a determination of need in that state. And so that really matters to what you're able to do. And if you're a physician in Massachusetts, then doing an office-based procedure suite is going to be your best route.
Got it. Now, I know you said that, the feasibility study is probably like one of the better things to start helping try to figure out whether the office-based procedure suite or an ASC would be better. But, just because I know that this would help a lot of people, we have a lot of physicians that are either finishing up their training, maybe in their first 3 to 5 years of training, right? They've either gone out on their own, maybe joined a small group. As they're starting, so is it okay if we maybe walk through like a physician starting to run through this process in their head, and like at least getting some idea? Obviously, generalities, this isn't going to be anything where, we're doing an actual feasibility study here. But I mean, I think there's probably a couple of different demographics that really do, I know a lot of our listeners fall into, that would probably be helpful as they're walking through this path. So, maybe the first one being that independent practitioner, right? They've hung a shingle and they're doing their own practice. They're the solo practitioner. Maybe they have a mid-level or two, but it's really just them as from a procedural standpoint. A lot of them, probably find an ASC that is in the community to get started, but now they've been in practice for 2 years and their volume is starting to pick up. How would you start the process of talking to that physician about thinking about the difference of like, okay, do I invest in the ASC that I'm just working in? do I build my own office-based procedure suite, or is it even feasible for me as a solo provider to think about the possibility of
Mhm.
building and owning my own ASC?
Right. A lot of it has to do with your risk tolerance and how much capital you're willing to invest in the project. So we've done some very cost efficient procedure suites for people. I mean, we did a cath lab in the office for a vascular surgeon a few years ago, and we found a decommissioned imaging center and literally pulled the CT out of the CT room, and it was 400 square feet. It was perfect to pop a C-arm in, and with minimal renovations, he was up and running. And so that felt for him, someone who was starting a new medical practice, and he was solo at that time, like, I can do this financially. It feels a lot less risky to me. Fast forward 3 years, as he was more established, he had brought in a partner, he had some APPs, his volume was solid. Then he said to himself, financially, the long-term, better play is the ASC. And now I'm ready to commit those dollars and commit to such a difficult process and, and time consuming process, because the development cycle itself for an ASC is, a couple years usually. So speed to market matters, and you can get an office-based suite turned up a lot faster. But when you're, like I said, when you're thinking it through and you're that doctor at that point, you want to know, first of all, what's legal? What am I allowed to do in the state where I'm practicing? And then consider, do I want to be doing this? How independent am I? Do I want to be able to support this facility with my own patient volume, or am I going to need to collaborate and have other colleagues that I'm working with, maybe outside of my practice? And that gives you some direction as well. So there, you have to do a lot of thinking about what you want and what your risk tolerance is. And I always tell people in business, you want to be playing chess, not checkers. We're not thinking about our next move. We're thinking 3 moves ahead. And that's how I would say to physicians to think about it.
Right. Well, so let's kind of walk out that scenario that you were just saying. So, the doc starts up, he starts with a easy move in office-based center. And then, 3 years later, he's realizing that he's growing. He's got added a partner and wants to do, or is starting to think about an ASC, or maybe we'll take it even slightly different. Maybe that practice grows for another 5 years. He's brought on 3 partners.
Mhm.
And so with their office-based procedure suite is, working most days. They're
Mhm.
very busy. And now you have, multiple physicians that are occupying an office-based suite pretty consistently, and wanting to take that on. What's the best way for that group of physicians to start saying, okay, yeah, we know it's going to be time intensive. We know it's going to be capital intensive. How do we know that this is going to pay off in the run, right? And I know you said the feasibility study will get that
Yeah.
the details of it, but is there like a threshold that you normally would say, okay, well, if you're doing X number of procedures, or Y volume of cases, that generally speaking, that this would be a good time to start spending
Mhm.
the money for a feasibility study and the time investment to do so.
Yeah. Well, I think if you've got, one way to think about it is people do build ASCs that have one procedure room or 2 procedure rooms, but in your specialty, you're very high volume, right? Your cases are short and you can move quickly. And so I would say to myself, do I have enough volume that I can really afford to have all of the staff that I need to have in this setting? And can I keep them busy for full days? And can I keep them busy for several full days a week? So that's one element, is how big is my volume? And then also think about what, again, your strategy is this going to be you on your own, or is it going to be multi-specialty? But at the end of the day, one thing that I tell people is there are certain spaces in the ASC that have to be there, whether it's a 1-room ASC or an 8-room ASC. So you have to have locker rooms where people can change with showers, which you do not have to have in your, private office. But to meet ASC regulations, you do. You have to have a nutrition station, but that nutrition station doesn't have to be, 8 times as big if you have more procedure rooms. And so it can be, financially less cost efficient if you're barely there with enough volume to keep, 1 or 2 rooms busy all day long. So it's, again, every project is different, but what we often see is a minimum of 2 rooms, and there is additional space shelled out that might not be fully built out and outfitted for future growth. And if you think, looking at the project, that's going to be too big and we're never going to get there, then you might want to start saying to yourself, do I really, because it's a big financial commitment.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, obviously it's going to vary by region and, the cost of land and the cost of labor and all, but I mean, ballpark, when we're starting to say a big financial commitment, if we're talking about a 2-room, ASC, are people talking 6 figures, or are we talking 7 figures?
7 figures. The construction costs for an ASC are extremely variable based on where in the country you are, and things, got really tough right after the pandemic. And now it's improving a little bit. Materials costs are down from where they were 2 years ago, but you could be looking at construction costs in the range of, anything from $400 to $600 a square foot for your ambulatory surgery center. And, that's before you spend the first penny on C-arms and stretchers and all of those types of things. And so these are several $1 million projects.
So I guess that leads kind of well into the conversation. So if somebody already has an office-based procedure suite, what is it likely that they would be able to convert that into an ASC?
Well, people ask us that all the time, and we that's one of the services we offer, is to help people analyze that and look at their floor plan. But most of the time the answer is no, because when you're building it for your office, you just tend to be more efficient. You don't add in as many things as you do if you have, as you have someone laying out a regulatory map. Your architect for your office probably didn't build corridors wide enough because it might seem like a waste of space in your practice, but if it's very hard to retrofit if your corridors aren't wide enough. Those are tough things to change, but sometimes it's possible. We even when we're doing an office-based procedural suite project, if the physician thinks they might have any interest in later conversion, we'll often counsel them to think about some of those construction items so that they have that future in mind, and say, maybe you're not worrying about piped in gases at this point, but having a closet set aside that will accommodate storing gas, cylinders at that future point makes sense. Or build the corridors to the right width now, so that if in the future you decide to do it, maybe you don't spend the money on the generator for your office-based procedural suite, but think about where that would go if you needed to purchase that to upgrade. And so we do sometimes do analysis on office-based procedural suites with that future in mind, but you have to really think through the issue of where's the waiting room, where's the entrance, because it has to be distinct from your clinic.
That's tremendous insights. I feel like I've learned a ton, and I really appreciate it. I selfishly, our practice is we work at in an area in California where there's a couple of very large hospital-based systems, and so most of the surgery centers are attached to the hospital-based systems because of that. And so we're partners at practices. And, one of the things that always pops into my head is always like, oh, I wonder if this is something that we can, pursue, as our practice has grown. And, we're up to 7 interventionalists now at this point. But at the same time, I think, we're all partners. And so I think that these conversations help, because understanding at least what is going to be necessary really helps physicians to understand, is this a battle that I'm ready to go into?
Well, and I've given you a lot of the hurdles, or what the hard part is, and that's kind of consistent with my brand. I tend to be a realist. I love to give people the tough news first, so that they're really realistic when they go into one of these projects. But here's what I will tell you on the positive side. We have never been busier with physicians who want to do this, because they want the autonomy and the control that goes along with taking care of their patients in the location of their choosing, and more importantly, in a location where they can make the decisions about who works there and what kind of supplies to use. And so doctors are continually pressing forward with these projects. And as you know, there are many things that cannot be done in an office-based procedural suite. And so if you want that autonomy and you want the ability to get your work done efficiently and go home early, or to do extra cases but still go home at the same time, this is a pathway to that. Another thing I would tell you is despite the high cost of these projects, banks love to loan money to doctors. And so we haven't seen physicians that have a solid business plan. And when we do a feasibility study, we are not only evaluating the regulatory piece of it, but we are doing a full financial pro forma, and we're helping the physicians understand precisely what this is going to cost, and precisely what their procedure mix is likely to generate in terms of revenue. Now, none of us have a crystal ball about the financial future with Medicare, but if we believe the trends that we've seen, year after year after year, the physician fee schedule gets cut. And every year the physician fee schedule goes, or the ASC fee schedule goes up. And so doctors that are working on this are taking that financial risk on because they're trying to build a sustainable future for themselves financially. And they're trying to build a future that allows them to have the balance in their life that they want, because they can just get more done for their patients and go home and spend their evenings with their family when they have control.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think it's a tremendous summary of the positives of it, after us scaring people for the last half hour.
Well, and the other thing I'll say is there are a lot of people who have done it successfully, and have done it successfully without even having expert advisors to help them. So it's definitely doable. It's definitely doable, but we counsel people to go into it with their eyes wide open, and more importantly, to go into it with a plan, because the people that go into it with a plan are the people that succeed.
That's a well said, and probably viable to just about everything in life. What other tips do you have for our physicians who are kind of walking this journey and considering ASC? Any closing thoughts or that you have for them?
Well, I think that one thing that we didn't talk about that's good to think about is that the ASC is it's an asset that you could use to sell at some point in your career if you wanted to, without having an exit strategy that looks like selling your practice to private equity. So there's a lot of consolidation in healthcare. Lots of physicians are saying, okay, well, that's going to be my future, is I'm going to sell to private equity. And if you're not interested in doing that, or you're not sure that you're interested in doing that, you can build your procedural workout in an ASC, sell that ASC asset, still take that money off the table, continue to do your cases there very happily to get the, all the benefits I just talked about in terms of work-life balance, but you still own your practice, and you're not anybody's employee. So I think that's something for physicians to think about, because a lot of physicians I know are thinking, earlier in their career about how will they have the retirement they want? And this is one way to do it. Another important thing along those lines is that because an ASC is such a huge capital investment, it almost always makes sense to own the real estate. You don't want to invest millions of dollars of building out an ASC and a building where after your 10-year lease is up, the building owner says, I'm not renewing. That would be horrible. But the positive thing about that is medical real estate can be a very, very good investment. And it's another way that physicians can earn money in these situations beyond what you're getting reimbursed for doing your procedures. Because when you construct a piece of real estate for this and the ASC entity signs a 10-year lease for that office, you've instantly created a lot of value. And physicians that own that real estate can then make a decision. Am I going to, after it's constructed, hold this asset over time and just get monthly, income from the profits from the lease? Or do I want to sell this to a REIT and, again, take some of that money off the table because you just created that to maybe pay down some of the
Right.
money that was borrowed for the ASC. And so think about the real estate part too. That's a big part of it.
Oh, awesome. Those are tremendous, tremendous tidbits. I truly, truly appreciate you spending some time and helping us to understand this world a little bit better. I know it's said all the time that, physicians go to school and training for so long and we learn how to take care of patients and we get out and all of a sudden we're asked to, many of us to, run our own businesses and figure out all this other stuff. And so it's always great to have people like you, Teri, that can point us in the right direction, give us some education. If anybody that's listening, found tremendous value and felt like they want to continue the conversation with you, what's a great place for people to reach out to you?
So our website is Doxcentric Surgery Centers. So look for doxcentricasc.com. Me personally, Accountable Physician Advisors is the consulting firm also that goes along with that. And Teri at accountableconsultants.com. People can reach me, but we would love to be of service to your listeners or to your practice if you guys have more questions about this journey, because this is our passion. We really love helping doctors figure out how to have fun in their work and to make money doing what they have fun doing. So good luck in figuring this out for your practice.
Well, thank you. And once again, thanks for spending the time with us and educating all of us. And I feel smarter. And so hopefully everybody else that spent the time with us today does too. Thank you again.
Thank you.